Comic Book Savant, episode 458. Welcome back to the Comic Book Savant podcast. I'm your host, James Harris. This episode, we're going to be doing a review of Star Wars Rise of Skywalker. I'm going to go ahead and preface this from the beginning. This is going to be a spoiler-filled review, so if you haven't seen the movie yet, pause this episode, wait till after you've seen the movie, and then come back and listen to this episode, because I don't want to ruin anything for you. With that being said, before we get into the episode, as always, I'd like to give a shout out to my friends over at the Comics Podcast Network. You can find them over at comicspodcast.com. It's a great resource if you're looking for more content similar to what you find here as far as comic book related content is concerned. They have podcasts like myself, which is a single person podcast, roundtable discussions, a dual host. You can find a lot of different formats of podcasts there. And then you can find all different types of genres as well. So you can find a podcast that is conversational. You can find one that's on a particular character, publisher, team. There's so much there if you're looking for comic book related content to listen to on your daily commute or just in general over at the Comics Podcast Network. Again, you can find them over at comicspodcast.com. And definitely, if you have a moment, check them out. And with all that being said, let's go ahead and get into the episode because it's a lot to cover. So we have the final film in the Skywalker, which has been dubbed now the Skywalker Saga, the ninth film, Rise of the Skywalker. And we have, as director, J.J. Abrams is back behind the director's chair. We know he directed Episode 7, The Force Awakens. Also, it's written by J.J. Abrams and his longtime if I can talk this morning, collaborator Chris Terrio. They both wrote the script for this. And the breakdown for the movie as is followed. The surviving resistance faces the First Order once more in the final chapter of the Skywalker Saga. And we have all the main principal actors back. We have Daisy Ridley back as Rey. We have Mark Hamill back as Luke Skywalker. Carrie Fisher back as Leia. Oscar Isaac as Poe. Adam Driver as Kylo Ren. John Boyega as Finn. Jonas Samatoa now taking over the role of Chewbacca since we had Peter Mayhew passed away earlier this year. Rest in peace. Jimmy V back as R2D2. Anthony Daniels back as C3PO. I hope I pronounced this correctly. Domhnall Gleeson back as General Hux. Kelly Marie Tran back as Rose Tico. Iman McDermott back as Palpatine. Kerry Russell as Zori Bliss. Lupita Nyong'o as Maz Kanata. Billy D. Williams reprising his role as Lando Calrissian. Richard E. Grant as Allegiant General Pride. Billy Lord as Lieutenant Connix. And Naomi Ackie as Jaina. And what I have to say about this movie, because it's been a super divisive movie by different things or different things you can see or hear about the film since this, even before it came out, when reviewers first start seeing the film. And I have to say this first and foremost, as just a piece of entertainment as a film, as did it entertain me or not, I felt like for me, The Rise of Skywalker was a entertaining, fun movie. Now, it's a movie after, you walk out of the theater and you start thinking about certain aspects of the movie. That's when it can kind of unravel with the deeper meaning of things. And I'm going to get into that a little bit later. So, again, it was a movie that I enjoyed while I watched it. And it took a little bit of time for me to digest what I saw, because so much happened in that 2.5 hour runtime for us to kind of deal with. It moved pretty briskly. I didn't feel like it dragged too long. I felt like certain beats were a little bit repetitive or unnecessary, but all in all, like I said, I had a fun time watching the movie. Now, getting into my thoughts, I feel like for me, out of these three movies in this new trilogy, I feel like this was easily the best movie. I felt like um, Force Awakens was just a retread of A New Hope, just with a nice gloss of shiny paint. But I did like the characters that we were introduced to in the film and wanted to see more of them. And I think that's was the biggest disappointment in this what is it, the Resistance trilogy of films, since we have what is it, we have the in the prequels it was the Republic saga, or the Republic trilogy, then we have the uh uh what was the other, Rebellion, and now we had the Resistance. And I feel like out of this trilogy, I think it was the most disappointing because I felt like it had the most potential, but it just never fully reached that potential. And it would have been nice if Disney would have had more of a solid game plan on the direction of where the trilogy of films were going. And it's a lot of stuff being talked about behind the scenes of Kathleen Kennedy's deal ends at the end of sometime in 2021, and maybe they need new leadership. We know she's notably had pretty much had issues with every director that she's worked with on every one of the Star Wars films, and I just feel like this was ill conceived, and they did not have a clear cut vision of where these three films were going to ultimately end up. I think they had a very sketchy, kind of rough idea on how it all was going to end, but you could definitely tell, especially coming off of a very divisive The Last Jedi into The Rise of Skywalker, that they were going out of their way. And I commend J.J. Abrams for even taking this job after everything that happened with Carrie Fisher passing away, with what was it, Colin Navarro. Was it Colin Navarro? Jurassic World dude that was supposed to direct the movie, and they didn't like his script, and it was all that going on, and he was fired, and then they needed a replacement. He came in and he did the best he possibly could to kind of potentially tell a story that he wanted to tell, and then kind of try to appease fans for The Last Jedi. And it was a lot of course correcting, then trying to resolve plots from 9 movies worth of story. It was a big undertaking, and you can tell that this movie was kind of what's the word? It was choppy at parts. You could tell that way more was shot, and I think I heard somewhere that maybe like the one of the cuts of the movie was like probably double the length, and so a lot got left on the cutting room floor because it was so much they had to tackle. So it left a lot of characters feeling like they didn't get much screen time. They were very underdeveloped. Then they had to deal with, they were using archive footage that JJ shot, extra footage that he shot from Force Awakens with Carrie Fisher that they used in this film. So they kind of had to write around setting those things up to be respectful to her memory, which I'm thankful that they did, and I felt like they worked pretty well. But then there was other aspects of things that didn't work well. We know JJ famously set up a lot of stuff with the Snoke, that then I felt like Rian Johnson just gave him a big middle finger when he had him be killed off so easily in The Last Jedi. And then so insert Palpatine, and I love Sheev Palpatine as a villain, but it's just like, it's crazy, like, okay, he's behind it again. So basically everything that happened in this trilogy of movies all ultimately was manipulated by one overarching villain, which is Palpatine. Now, I wouldn't have had any problem with that if we knew that from the very beginning, but we had all these things set up with Snoke being his own entity, uninfluenced or untethered by Palpatine, just to come to figure that no, he even manipulated Snoke as well. And it felt very force fed, and it didn't work for me. I think that's one aspect of the movie that I think bothered me the most, is that the inclusion of Palpatine just didn't work, and it just felt forced on. And those scenes kind of were like my least favorite in the movie, to be honest with you. I felt like, a lot of the actors, like I said earlier, because the cut of this film was so choppy, I felt like, Kerry Russell, Naomi Ackie, Kelly Marie Tran, Lupita Nyong'o, Domhnall Gleeson were all criminally underutilized in the film, and I felt like it was more there, but again, it got left on the cutting room floor. So those characters, and they seemed like all really new, cool characters, but Kelly Marie Tran, you know, it was good to see her and see that her character had like evolved, like her look, her style, and it seemed like she definitely had a way more important role in the resistance. But we really didn't get much time with her at all. It seemed like she was going to be like that fourth character, kind of included in with our core characters, and it really wasn't. They just really didn't address like her and Finn's relationship, if they had a relationship, based on all the setup from the last film at all. So it just felt very underutilized and very, very choppy. Um, I felt like after watching these three films, out of those three core characters, Finn, Ray, and Poe, that I feel like after that three movies, I feel like I still know little to nothing about all those characters. And the explanation behind Rey's parentage, about her being a Palpatine, like they didn't even explain how Palpatine even had children. It was nothing ever discussed about that he had a bloodline, he had family and things of that nature. So it's really curious to find out, uh he had a son or a daughter, I can't remember which, and then they had Rey, and then they got killed off. That all kind of felt weird. Like I said, and it was funny, like so much stuff that people theorized after the very first movie going into the second movie. A lot of I heard theories about Rey being a Palpatine, like after Force Awakens, going into The Last Jedi. That so a lot of speculation and that people threw out there, all kind of, it was like they read the same fan fiction and they just went with it, that so it worked. And like I said, if that was a little bit more executed better, um, I think another issue is like the scripting of the film. I feel like so much of the story was random plot lines taken from other areas of Star Wars lore. Like a lot of stuff had been taken from Legends through books and comics. Then we have stuff from the Clone Wars. Then we have stuff from Star Wars Rebels, and so on and so forth, in different books and whatever. Some of the books are in canon, but the older books, the Legends books, are not in the comics. And they had delved with Palpatine being cloned, and he had came back through cloning so much. They took stuff from the Mandalorian, which we saw with Baby Yoda, that Force healing was a thing that we never knew and saw before. We had seen it just in this week's episode that came out Wednesday, right before Rise of Skywalker was released. So when we saw it in the movie, and I feel like it was very poorly executed and not explained at all. I knew what it was because I watched I have Disney Plus and I watched The Mandalorian. But if you hadn't seen that, then you wouldn't know what was going on, and you wouldn't really have a context. And they did nothing to explain what that whole thing was, and it ended up being a very important plot device throughout the movie, especially when it came to the end with Kylo's character saving Rey. And it just was not explained well. um, I did not like one thing I didn't care for in the story element, is we had never heard this before in any of the comics or anything else. Is like, once once you're a Jedi, you're imbued with the power of all the Jedi, and when you're a Sith, you're imbued with all the power of all the Sith. So like, it came down to, in that final fight, that Palpatine had all the power and knowledge of all the Sith, and then Rey had all the powers and all the knowledge um of the Jedi. It just seemed hokey, and I just now the Force is a living, breathing entity, like they said that everyone contributes into it, and you could channel it, but just, I don't know, maybe just how it was executed or even explained in the film, just it just was like, okay, whatever. I just didn't like that phrasing of it. It just didn't work, uh, extremely well for me. I felt like they used the overabundance of action uh, scenes, and even though they were shot extremely well, and this was a beautifully shot film, that I felt like they used the big overarching multiple action shots to cover up the flimsy story and the thrown together narrative to cover that up with a bunch of action. And some people felt like the other two movies lacked action, so they said, okay, now we're gonna go all in on action. And I felt like it was too much. It was action without substance. Though it was visually stunning, it was no real substance to it, and the movie just was packed with action from the beginning because they knew the story was thin, so they just threw action set pieces like Kylo looking for the different pieces, and it just was not well explained. Like I said, and if you just took the movie in as the experience in the moment, you just be like, you would just go along for the ride. But like I said, the moment I stepped out of the theater and me and my wife got in the car, we started talking about the film. But and she doesn't read the comics that I've read, and I've listened to a few of the audio books, and I have more of them that I'm going to listen to. That So I knew different things about the world and certain things that happened, and I understood some of the things that I saw. The dagger was not explained at all. That was from Clone Wars, and it wasn't elaborated on or explained in any way whatsoever. The force healing, just different things, Palpatine cloning. I wish that those aspects of the story, which felt very important, were just really glanced over as little to nothing. But I felt like all the actors, despite the issues I have with the script or how the story was executed, I felt like all the actors did a really good job. Ian McDermott was totally over the top, like he needed to be for Palpatine. But again, it just leaves. I feel an overwhelming feeling when I think about The Rise of Skywalker, and I think about this Resistance trilogy of films, is that the phrase that comes back to mind over and over again is a lost opportunity. I felt like it was an opportunity for so much more to be done with Star Wars and moving the franchise forward, going into for even another generation of kids and fans. And I feel like the ball ultimately was dropped in that aspect of things. I hope they continue on. I know they're saying there's going to be no more necessarily Star Wars films, Star Wars, as far as the Star Wars saga, but we would see more of these characters again. I don't know if it's going to be through books, a show, animated show, a Disney Plus live action show. No one knows at this point. I feel like the brand, I at first I was upset about them taking a break coming after this film. Now, after seeing the film, though I enjoyed it, I'm kind of happy they are going to take a couple years break. I think they're on the right track with Disney Plus telling more long term storytelling. I think that worked. We saw the blueprint set what Marvel Netflix with those shows, and I feel like in that format, and Mandalorian, what we have, one more episode to go next week of the Mandalorian. And that's why I feel like that longer form, having 6, 8, even 10 episodes of narrative to develop plot lines and storylines and develop characters over a series like that, it helps any property that is related to. And Mandalorian has shown that it's different. It's not a perfect show, but I've really enjoyed it, and I'm more excited about the TV side with Disney Plus, seeing the first example coming out the gate with the Mandalorian. So I'm looking forward to the Obi-Wan show and the Cassian and Andor show, and whatever other shows they'll do for Star Wars going forward. I haven't watched Star Wars, what is it, Resistance, the animated show, but I've watched I've watched Clone Wars, I've watched Rebels, so I want to get into that as well. And I feel like here's the thing. I think this trilogy, will leave a bad taste in people's mouths, similar to like how the prequels did for whatever reason. And I think it was Disney learning how to handle this franchise. And so I think as time goes, and different shows will come out and connect tissue, and more comics will be out and flesh out the gaps in between, and it'll all come together. But here's the thing, and this is the saddest part. The Clone Wars television show helped the prequels out so much because it really fleshed out Anakin's character and Obi-Wan's character, their relationship, Yoda, all those different aspects of people. And like Rogue One is one of my favorite of the Disney movies, and I think the reason why I connected to it is before that movie came out, they had a book, Catalyst, that gave so much insight into the characters of gosh, what's the main character's name? The main character in that movie and her father, Urso. Urso. I can't remember her first name, but you know what I'm talking about. And her dad, even the villain in the movie. Like, so much context was, and so much setup and character development happened in that book. So I was already all into those characters by the time I sat down and watched that movie for the first time, because of I had all that background. Different miniseries. And I could say one thing with Disney owning Marvel and owning all these other properties, Marvel has put out some extremely good, not all of them have been home runs, but they've all did different things to add to the lore and the canon. And they did what was it? Anakin and Obi-Wan, a miniseries that showed and gave more context on how Anakin was treated and received by Jedis, which explains a lot to how Sheev was able to infiltrate and manipulate Anakin the way he was able to. So I feel like as time passes, we'll get comics, we'll get books that will fill in those gaps of time and flesh out these characters more. Then hopefully by the time, if they do decide to do another movie or do something live action with these characters, that then if you are a diehard fan or fan that enjoys the Star Wars lore in other forms of media, will be able to get a fuller story. But there's so many fans that only watch the movies, so they don't get the context or understand the developments, or then can go back and now you see how the different pieces fit together, because they do a good job on the back end of course correcting through books, through shows, through comics as well, and it's worked. And since I'm we are huge comic fans, that helps a ton in that aspect. But like I said, I felt like it had so much potential and it just fell short. I still own all 8 films. I'll own this one when it comes out. As far as my overall score of the movie, I gave it a score of 7.5 out of 10, and I wanted to look at where that lined up with the rest of the movies. I went back to my previous reviews, so I gave this one a 7.5 out of 10. I gave The Rise of Skywalker at the time, these are my initial reviews, not how I felt later. I gave the Last Jedi, I gave it an 8.5 out of 10. And then I gave The Force Awakens at the time I gave it a between a 7 and an 8. I didn't do my specific number score because I wasn't doing that at the time. But it was a date night rental, and on my scale, date night rental is between a 7 and an 8, so it falls kind of in between. So they all kind of feel like they're decent or solid movies. You know what I mean? They won't. I feel like they'll never resonate like the original trilogy has. Not for me, because I was born in '75. I saw all the original Star Wars movies in the theater except for Return of the Jedi. I've seen every theatrical release of a Star Wars movie except for Return of the Jedi in theaters. Yeah. I even saw, because people forget that the Clone Wars had a theatrical release. The pilot episodes, they were put together in a movie, and that was actually released theatrically. So yeah, I've seen everyone in theaters except for that. in my in my lifetime. And again, I'm a kid of the 80s. I grew up on the original trilogy. That will always be kind of my go-to. And I think my favorite movie in the Star Wars legacy of films will still always be Empire Strikes Back. I think that's the best Star Wars movie of all of them, in my personal opinion. And it's just that my personal opinion, not trying to, throw shade at nobody or anything like that. But that just seems to be my favorite. Now, I saw some reports on that they're going to be releasing, this movie's going to be hitting home video sometime in March of 2020. And they're going to be doing a Skywalker saga. And I heard details online about that they're going to do a similar thing with Best Buy that they did with the MCU box that they had all the movies, but this will just have the 9 Skywalker saga films in it, which is sad because I feel like you should include Rogue One in that because it very much ties into it, but it's just going to be the core 9 Skywalker saga films. But I really think Rogue One should be in that set, but it's not included from the reports unless they change it later, and that's subject to change because we have months before it comes out. But I feel like that needs to be included in there. That's a really important part of the Skywalker saga is Rogue One. But I digress. That's going to be coming in a little while, so I'll revisit this movie at a later point, and it might change. And once it's out on home video, you can watch the 3 films as a full trilogy, and then be able to dive deeper. And I think it's a lot of discussion that can be had between a lot of the decisions that were made behind closed doors, behind the scenes, in the process of making these films. That they feel like 3 totally separate films that are pieced together by very thin plot threads throughout the movies. Out the one thing that was the constant was the characters, but again, I felt like they were never fully developed. I think where some of the characters were left coming out of this movie towards the end set them up so much for things to come in the future, but will we ever get those things? I know Daisy Ridley said she doesn't want to do another Star Wars movie anytime soon, or that was what she was said around, I think, when the Rise of Skywalker, not the Rise of Skywalker, when The Last Jedi came out. When she was done with this trilogy, she kind of wanted to step away for a while. She's super young. That might change, it might not. It might be a while before we have another one of these films. We don't know what direction we've had so many announcements recently. We had that Kevin Feige is going to be producing and overseeing a Star Wars movie at some point. We had the Benny Offenwise thing, but they've exited. It's still Ryan Johnson supposedly was supposed to have a trilogy in there. It's so many different rumors, but we know we won't get the next film until like 2022. So that break is good for me. I know in the interim, in that time frame, we're gonna have the Cassian Andor show and the Obi-Wan show, and they're already shooting Mandalorian season 2. And there's going to still be plenty of comics and so forth that's going to be coming out. So, and I've honestly been enjoying Star Wars and other mediums more than I have enjoyed the movies. And since Disney has taken over the core movies, like I said, I loved Rogue One. I really enjoyed and thought Solo was fun. Even though it wasn't quite the movie I wanted it to be, I still enjoyed it for what it was, and I would like to see something, some type of sequel to that. But time will tell to see how everything shakes out. But again, I did, like I said, enjoy the movie. Was it my favorite of all time out of the Star Wars saga of films? No. But I think it was the best out of this trilogy, which on one side I feel like is not saying much because it was so much to improve upon from each movie. But it's, like I said, once you start pulling at the thread, this movie crumbles or folds quicker than a deck of cards, just to be honest. But again, it depends on your perspective, because I've read a lot of the Star Wars comics since Disney taken over. So many things that I would have liked to see included that was even set up or fleshed out in some of those countdown to Force Awakens and the rise of I know I haven't read the Rise of Skywalker stuff yet. I bought the stuff recently with all the sales going on, but I haven't read it yet. But the stuff they did around The Last Jedi with Phasma and other things that, like I said, I think more meat and more clarity will be given to some of these holes, to fill in some of these holes, because they're great. I'll say on the tail end, um, Lucasfilms is great at filling out those holes and smoothing all the stuff out from films uh, through these other mediums. So I look forward to seeing and reading those things going forward. But that's really all my thoughts that I have on the Rise of Skywalker. Like I said, it's a lot more that needs to be, done. Like I said, me personally, I'm cool with not seeing another Star Wars movie for a couple years. Um, Really, I could use the break, and like I said, I'm so excited to see the new directions they go on, and like I said, through like Disney Plus moving forward with the franchise, that has reinvigorated my excitement as a Star Wars fan more so than the movies. So I'm all aboard on that. But that's all I really have for you guys for this episode. I didn't get this recorded yesterday, which was Monday. This is Christmas Eve morning. I wanted to, like I promised you guys, a regular episode. I wanted to get it out. So I want to wish you all a Merry Christmas. It'll be another episode out next week. So we'll have a similar format. You'll have one going into the new year as well. And I just want to tell you guys how much I appreciate all of you, all of your support through all the things that I've gone through personally in the past year with my health and just supporting the show. It's going to be some changes that I want to talk about, that I need to talk to you guys about going into next year, but that'll come probably after the new year. But again, if you enjoy the content that I do and you want to help support the show, you can always look at Patreon. It's patreon.com/comic book savant. You can always go to the website, which is comicbooksavant.com, if you want to do a one-time donation to contribute to the show, or go over to Patreon, where you can do a monthly contribution that automatically would come out, and you have perks and benefits, and you have access to additional material through the Patreon campaign. That really helps support the show, and that's one of the things I want to talk about going into the new year, that's going to actually become more of a vital part going forward and keeping the show going, and to do the things that I want to do to keep growing the show. And I'm going to really need your guys' support. But again, we'll talk about that at a later time. You guys have helped me so much this year getting the show to this point, but we want to go above and beyond and grow and get bigger and get better. So it's more to do. It's more work to do on that side. But I just want you guys to enjoy your holiday. Be safe. And I love all you guys. And until next time, you guys stay safe. And I'll talk to you soon. Take care.